Pizza. I expect absolute silence while I indulge myself in pizza.
You can follow the links to that song. Caleb.
I'm wondering if it's just the angle I'm sitting at, but I'm guessing the TVs have two different picture settings right now.
What do you mean? Those are
Right.
exactly
Maybe, but one's also slightly more
The
forward,
official
so it might be
cascading
reflecting
style
light
sheets
differently.
Okay, that's what I'm
I've
saying. That might be the
searched
angle I'm
for
sitting at,
But that
for me-
cursor's brighter.
Yeah, well, I'm saying that one looks darker to me, but
It's on w3.org. You can search for w3.org cascading style sheets. And then we can all watch it together.
Well, the only CSS website you ever need is CSS Zen Garden.
Yep.
what's it
I'll
called?
check that.
also worth mentioning a single div.
A single div is also pretty sick. A
CSS
single.
CSS Zen Garden.
Zen Garden? I didn't hear of that. I just go to CSS tricks, whatever.
Zen Garden is how I learned CSS.
This is 4 minutes.
Back when tables were still a thing.
Yep.
What is it even
Back in the
song
day.
about?
CSS is okay. Just okay.
Not great,
Yeah,
not good.
and that's on the official CSS homepage. This is an official message from the W3 consortium about CSS.
What is W3?
What is it? Where'd you share this?
Is it
I didn't share it.
w3c.org?
We shared it with
The
this
CSS
in this
working
room.
group shared this with the world.
Not put
Yeah.
it in
What
the
is it?
Discord.
It's like a song about CSS.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Go on their homepage.
CSS
It's
is
embedded right there.
okay. Sometimes.
And it's
it
just
can
as
be
horrific
nice.
as you can imagine.
Yeah. You would think for a CSS website, there would be like good practices of CSS or like styling.
CSS
Well,
Zen
I'm sure
Garden.
it is.
The problem with the
Well, I'm-
W3C is that they will draw out 83 pages of spec and not actually define a spec. So the fact that they don't understand their own CSS creation
Explains a lot.
is not surprising at all.
Yeah.
Could they describe it in simple terms? No, they couldn't even describe it in complex terms.
I just feel like CSS should be the only one where like you just describe it with a visual. Probably the easiest way.
One would hope.
Like I feel like they're the ones who probably get away with it because it's CSS.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, it's not like it's not the most like functional language or whatever you can call it a language. It's just like
It's declarative. Are you talking about CSS?
yeah. And so
Declarative, like a
Dang it.
SQL.
I meant to include that in my slides.
About CSS?
Clarity?
We still have time.
No, I declare bankruptcy!
We still have time.
you probably got like 3 minutes to do it.
I don't care that much.
So at least we're being honest with ourselves now.
I think you have to walk the whole way around unless you got to.
I shared it in the chat, so, you know, maybe I'll just be like, and this is when you go,
Dude, don't do that, that's how they get you. That's how you declare bankruptcy.
yeah.
Well, I want everybody to know, I only paid $40 for this thing, and it's working. That's like a 7-star review right there. 2 more stars than normal to offset any
Out of 10 stars or what?
out of 5.
Oh, okay.
No, it's
Sorry, 7 sounded like it's like a C.
No, the last time I bought one of these, I paid almost $200 for it. I mean, I bought like 3 of the $40 ones first, and none of them ever worked. And then I sprung for the near $200 one, and then that has worked really well. And then I thought, okay, this one's got really high reviews because most HDMI adapters have like either 3 stars or only 3 reviews and 5 stars. But this one's kind of in the middling area. It was like, could still be bots that are propagating the reviews. Might actually be the first $40 HDMI capture card that works. And it works. It probably won't be on Amazon in a week. But it's called Pocoxy. Pocoxy? It was marketed as a Nintendo Switch capture card, but it seems to be working.
5 out of 7 best ever.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started by doing our rounds around, because that's how we do rounds. So,
You're gonna
Jojo,
start with me, or
no, I'm not going to start with you. I'm just going to say that we'll get back to you because you're going to introduce yourself when you present.
Oh boy.
Ryan. Wait, no, well, you know, we're going to start on this side so that you can see how it's done, just in case you've forgotten, because it's been a while. Okay. Hey, it's my face. We don't ever show my face. I'm the man behind the curtain. So, as you all know, every single one of you know, I'm AJ. So, I run the meetup, and that's all we need to say about that. Then we've got Caleb.
Hello, I'm Caleb. Or Caleb Erkenbreck.
You can speak to the real people, even though they know
I'm
who you
talking
are.
to the camera.
Yeah, you don't know. You don't need to talk to the
Viewers out
I'm trying to
camera.
be TikTok famous, okay?
Oh, dang it. Carry on.
Kids these days.
Caleb, I do mainly front-end JavaScript. Work for a company called Revo. We are hiring a senior QA automation engineer. So if you're interested, I can point you to people.
Sweet. I'm Manuel. I do mostly front end as well, trying to work my way into full stack. And yeah, I'm just build stuff and tinker with random stuff.
I'm Austin. I also build stuff. I work for a tiny startup using Reactive, TypeScript, and some other stuff. I have a lot of opinions.
And even more questions, which is delightful.
That's how you would get your opinions informed, right? You have to hear all the other opinions and synthesize them.
Ideally, but not.
Chesterton Spence is no match for you. Todd?
I'm Todd Funk on Discord. I do stuff, often with computers.
That's true. That's true. Todd's son?
My name's Jacob, and
Oh, Jacob.
I am Todd's son. I'm just an engineer who happens to use software to do things I want, and it's very convenient.
What kind of engineer?
Typically software, but I
But not
often
always.
Well, you said you were an engineer that happened to use software. That maybe civil engineer, maybe military engineer, maybe
There's
acrobatics.
been some civil
why would I-
engineering involved.
It's true. I mean, can you really just pick one? There's so many.
What's your title? Engineering is a mindset.
My title at work,
Yeah.
senior engineer.
So they keep it broad too.
Senior software engineer specifically. Sorry. But yeah, I like building things, and so I'm here to learn more about building.
All right. Travis?
Travis Barney. I work at Vivint. I build stuff like other people here.
All right. And then the reason that we're doing names at all tonight. Ryan.
I'm Ryan, spelled like lion. That's why he says it that way. I work for the cryptocurrency Dash. I do strategy at an organization called Dash Incubator. I work with these fine folks every now and then when I'm privileged enough to have them, and glad to be here.
Wait, hold on, wait. Why are you here tonight?
Because I want to see this presentation, not just because it's Jojo Bite, but also because it's a fascinating topic for me.
All right.
all right, I'm Jojo Bite on the socials and stuff, and I am presenting on frameworkless async JavaScript components.
Really, because that looks like a black screen. But before we get into that, once again, thanks very much, Travis, Jeff out there somewhere, maybe Vivint, for providing pizza place this wonderful opportunity. And with that, Jojo, take it away.
All right, so that's why it was black, because I had one tiny little animation. Did you miss it? Here, I'll go
I missed
back.
it. Oh,
There you go.
was that your voice?
Are Are you loosening up JavaScript?
Use the has operator.
I'm actually actually, no, you're right. I'm listening. I do hate TypeScript, so, yeah. Yes, I'm
I
listening.
like this. This is a good thing, yes.
Can I derail us for just 30 seconds?
Started the presentation.
There's a show called Monkey Mechanic for toddlers, and the monkey mechanic tightens the wheels on the bus the wrong way.
It is a monkey, you know.
Anyway,
Right,
all right.
So social stuff, if you want to look me up and follow me and watch some of my videos. I do a lot of streams for Dash and various other projects I'm working on. Prerequisites, I'm guessing everyone here probably has a browser and a code editor already. But in case you needed that stated, you need those. And then you might need Node.
And Zarek says hello.
Hello. All right. So, is a framework required to build a modern web app?
Is that a vote or no? Oh,
No. Ancient toddler proverb. All right. So what I'm going to try and convince you of here tonight is the cake is a lie. You do not need a framework. But some things you will find. You're concerning me looking at stuff like that.
I was like about to say something to you.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, what's happening? I don't like
I
your
was just checking
proximity.
audio levels.
All right.
Ignore
Just-
the AV crew.
Quit speaking like a baby and man up with your voice.
Fine. All right. Let's see. So what else is about it? What else is about frameworks? Well, the buzzwords. That's mostly what you got is buzzwords. This is going to take a while, so let me just hold this down. Let's see. These are all things you might need to know or learn if you want to use modern frameworks. How many of you know what all of these terms mean in context of front-end frameworks?
Do I have to admit that on recording?
Yes.
I don't know what hoist is.
It will be on your permanent record.
I got at least a couple things depending on my.
Cybernetic.
The ones,
Svelte.
the ones in white are the ones you need to know for a pre-seed,
Okay.
and the ones in gray are what you need for Series A and B, and then you need to know both for Series C.
No. That's just even odd
Okay.
styling in CSS.
Oh.
There's actually, that's just so you could differentiate between the phrases or words easier.
And the child.
Yep,
and then you
pretty much.
don't have it.
Because an extendable optimal proxy is absolutely a thing that would be in several frameworks.
Hey,
Hey,
I pulled these off of all of their websites
Yeah,
and just
that-
combined
I was
them.
being
Makes
100%
sense.
serious.
Yeah.
That they would absolutely use those words.
Yes, these are, they really do.
you're missing. You're missing
Cybernetic
blazing.
thread?
You don't have blazing.
None of them
or
said
cyber-
blazing on their front page.
What?
Yeah, I know, I was very disappointed. All right,
Maybe we don't have a blaze.
had enough of the buzzwords? Yeah, yeah?
I don't know.
All right,
Buzzword to me, baby.
so frameworkless JavaScript, to what end? You can avoid the black hole. I'm sure many of you have seen this meme where, node modules is the heaviest object in the universe. You can avoid that by doing vanilla JavaScript. You can demystify the behind-the-scenes magic of a framework into the science of a craft. And you become a master of your trade and an artisanal JavaScript programmer. All right.
Also just move faster.
Yes, this is true. So,
That's a really good buzzword.
these are some main entry points of Vue, React, I think, and they're just very small. It seems very easy to go, like to get started with this. There's not much there, and as you go deeper into the app.vue, app.gsx, so these things, they get a little bit larger and you start to see more and more implemented. But my example here is you can do this with vanilla. This is an example from the components I wrote. And so you can mimic very similar style to how they initiate the applications and have very similar functionality without using a framework at all. And so some of the things that I've been figuring out is how to get reactivity working. So using signals, which is something Solid has repopularized, but it was based on Knockout.js and various other frameworks that have existed throughout the years. This is just a very simple implementation of it. This one on the left, you just use the create signal. This other one is more for if you're familiar with React hooks and you get it in array. Like that's the difference pretty much. And you can use these in a global store. And I forgot this. I knew this many, many years ago. And the file has its own little state. So if you import the same file from multiple different files, it will maintain that state. And so if you happen to have reactive properties inside that file, it is now a global store. And you can have reactivity just like that. So just by using the create signal and then importing count right here, any component will be using a global count if you do it that way.
Okay.
It's not so much like global, right? It's like module scope.
As
but
in
everything's
global to the application rather than to the component. You can also use that exact same create signal or the hook version inside the component, and it would be specific to the component.
And create signal is coming from Solid.js?
Nope,
Or what is it?
that's all it is. It's a vanilla JavaScript function I wrote.
Oh, you wrote it, okay.
Yep.
What's it doing?
It's based on, and I'll get to some code where I list the references of what I did, but I mean, this one on the left is, it's just returning the value here, and the value gets set up initially when you instantiate the function, and there's also a last value. That's a bonus. I didn't see this anywhere else, but I liked having that because you can compare the two values very easily. It's got a pub for publishing, and it keeps an array of subs. The set value obviously sets the value. It updates the last value to whatever it's currently, the current value is, the underscore value, and then it updates it to whatever you're trying to set it to, and then it publishes that. And publish just loops over the subs array and triggers each of them with the value and the last. And then on, you pass it a function, and it adds it to that subs array, and it returns a function itself, and that function can be used to unsubscribe.
So, as someone who hasn't worked with signals enough, can you give me a quick 101 of what signals are and kind of like their utility?
Essentially, they enable reactivity. So instead of relying on the framework to like the use hooks and stuff like that, which I will get into this a little bit more and show you some examples of other apps that do this, but essentially it lets you use one value and you can update that value, and anywhere that's referencing that value gets updated if you subscribe to it properly.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
But yeah, I'll point that out more as I get into it further here. So that's just how this global state is implemented. And then I've got a little example vanilla JavaScript function over here. I had actually wanted to get to implementing some of the web component stuff, kind of like what Todd presented on last month, but I didn't get to that for that presentation, so it's going to be lacking in that. But
this exists and it's fine.
yes, yeah. And yeah, so now we're going to dive into some code, and it's not because I couldn't figure out how to get the code editors to scroll in the slides. That's for sure. So let's see. these. All right, so actually, I should say that these slides and these repositories are, oh shoot, I think they're private on my GitHub, but I will make them public on my GitHub, at some point tonight. So essentially, I've set up these repositories to mimic as if you were to create a Vite project. So I think, let's see. So I have a Vite example in here that's just using vanilla JavaScript, and that's how I set it up with that command there. And that's this project, and then I'm also doing a Vite router one. But to go to the vanilla one, this runs just in browser, no compilation needed. It imports main right here for the script module. Inside main, it literally imports the app, and I only did that so that it mimics the other applications like React, Vue, Svelte, Quick, Solid, all of those. They basically have an entry file main like this that imports the app, and that's why I followed this pattern. And then inside app, I've got a little bit more. I've got it importing several different components. Just some very basic HTML here. And actually that's not highlighting, even though the whole point of that is to highlight. Don't know why that's not highlighting. I'll have to check it out later. And then this create app has one event listener that lets you lazy load or basically asynchronously load another component. So it's not loaded until you click the button, and it just toggles between the two options. And so I believe I've got this running. Are there any questions? You
Loaded
look
meaning downloaded or like running in memory?
as in it does not do the network request until you click the
No.
load button. So part of this is asynchronous components. They would not be asynchronous if
Kind of like
They-
Quick.
yes, exactly, similar. I don't have all of the like server-side generated stuff figured out for this. I wish I could have gotten there, but I have figured out some of the stuff Quick does, but you can do it without Quick. So let me see if I can pull this up. Any questions, by the way?
Nope, not so far.
All right, that's wrong. What did I do wrong? Let's see. npm start. Oh, it helps if you're in the right file. All right, so the only reason that I can tell that this app vanilla one needs a web server to run it is because the type module gets cross-origin blocked. So as soon as you define a type module here on the script tag, you cannot load just the HTML in your browser, sadly. And I looked into that, and there's, as far as I can tell, there's no way around it other than running a server. But other than that, you could almost just load this HTML file from your file system, and it should have worked if it weren't for that cross-origin reason. So let's see.
Would that run into any issues like on like browsers trying to like run this?
Yeah, so essentially if you were like dragging from your file system the index.html into your browser, it should, a normal script tag would work, but as soon as you add type module, that won't work. It won't load because it gets cross-origin blocked.
The security profile of every browser is different if it is on a file URL, localhost, or any 127.x.xx address. So you really, really want to have HTTPS on a regular domain even when you're doing web development. Otherwise, you are playing with, what is the difference? Who knows today?
This is true. I have a setup that I generally use that is just a little node server that goes to my home directory and looks for a localhost.pim and localhost.cert so I can run a server with SSL enabled, and then I can get around a lot of stuff. And I've actually needed it for the Dash work because several of the APIs won't let you hit it unless you're using HTTPS.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, I'm trying to invert this to light mode real quick. Let me see if this will work. That's not much better.
I prefer the previous.
Yes. All right, so it's not good enough contrast, but this is a button, count. If I click this button, it is updating the global state, and that's not very obvious, but this count button and this bar are two different components. So they are updating based on subscriptions to the global state count. And then if I click load async, that just loaded a third component, which is that green bar. And now as you update it, I think the green bar is ×3 and the pink one is ×1.5 or something like that. So every time I click the button, I'm also adding a random integer because originally it was just +1, and then I was trying to see like the bars moving and I was clicking a lot. So it has just a random number it's adding every time I click it. And then I can unload that asynchronous component, and now it's disconnected from the global state. And so unless I load the asynchronous component again, it will be disconnected. But once I do, it has a render function in there, so as soon as it loads, it gets updated to the global state. And so I will swap back here real quick to the code editor so you guys can see. So what we've got here in app is these functions being loaded. So there's a setup counter, that's the button, setup bar, and setup lazy. The bar is the hot pink one, the lazy one is the green one, and they're being set up just right here. That's where the HTML is set up, and they get called down here. So we've got setup counter, setup bar, and they're being attached to the IDs, which are defined here in this HTML. And this click event looks for the ID of lazy. So this button, any button that gets clicked with the ID of lazy would trigger this, but we only have one. So every time you click it, what it's doing is setting the lazy variable up here, and it either sets it to undefined and switches it back to loading, or if it's the first time, it changes the button value by setting the inner HTML, and then this is where it's actually triggering the asynchronous component. And so if we go into these components, which I've done literally, this components vanilla folder is no package.json, no external libraries. This is literally vanilla JavaScript. So this is where I've got a little bit more of the utility functions. So the lit function, which I'm thinking this function gets used similar to, I don't know if that's clear. Is that clear? I don't know.
What? Back up. What?
It's for string literals. And so you can assign HTML or CSS, and it's supposed to enable in your code editor. Although I just installed VS Codium tonight, so maybe I'm missing an extension or something like that.
Yeah.
But it just does syntax highlighting, or it's supposed to, which is what I was trying to show. Let's see. Here, this should all be highlighted right now.
You need the lit HTML,
Is that it?
Or it's one of them. I think
Maybe.
do that to it.
Maybe I haven't installed that. So if that's installed, just having this HTML thing there would highlight this correctly like HTML rather than just a random string that you can't differentiate very well. So back to the utils here. What we've got is that lit function at the top. We've got the reactive signal, and I've got a little more examples. It's a little more obvious when you hover over this, actually. The example gets code highlighted. So this is a very simple signal. It's more or less the exact code I showed in the slides, just, in a file that's more accessible. And then this is the use signal version, which is more React hook style. And as you can see here, it has a count, a set count, and I don't think the hooks provide a listener, but as that's how you kind of have to deal with this being vanilla, I provide that on listener handler, and that's how you can listen to the changes and update your code. And then this summon one is just me being lazy and not wanting to do a lot of this stuff, and so it just lets me parse JSON URLs. But let's go back to counter. So this is how the button is getting the functionality connected to it. So every time you click the button, it's got the count, which is loading in from the store, which I can actually, let's see. These are the values in the store.js. It's just got a signal for the count, and then it's got a signal for these three other values, which I will show in a little bit here. But let's go back to counter. So counter, I've got more than I would like, but there's reasons for this. Having the listener defined like this rather than inline actually lets you remove the event listener in an unsubscribe function. So that's the only reason this listener is separated out. But if you want to be able to unsubscribe to things, so you're not having memory leaks and stuff like that, that's important. We've got the set counter actually sets the value, so that's the global state value, and it just accepts a number. And it gets used down here, and that's just how it gets initialized, essentially. And then other than that, it's also used in the listener. So every time the button is clicked, it triggers the listener, so it updates the counter, and this is where it's getting the random number, essentially. And then the upsub count, this is provided, so when you do that subscription, so when you listen to on returns the unsubscribe value. And this I actually lifted the idea from a library called Vivint, and I actually thought it was pretty cool. But it actually had a tiny little bug in it. But if you want something simple that does similar things, it's actually a great little library. And that's how the count button works, just that file. There's no framework needed, and that's how it, let's see, that's how it's incrementing that value. And then we can go into the
Wait. Cage fight time.
cage fight.
So, will you go back to store where count is defined?
Sure.
I meant go to create signal where we see how a signal is defined.
Utils.
Terrible name. Should call that signal or something. Because now it's got to be create signal instead of signal not create. See how those work? No. So, so here you've done this, and but Todd was doing it with just the built-in browser event system.
Yep.
This seems like it kind of looks simpler than what I remember that looking like, but that may have been an implementation choice, not necessarily a constraint of the way that it was done. Why? Fight it out. Tell me on why should I be using...
They're different use cases. He's keeping a value,
Whereas the event system that I was using is something else holds value and wants to broadcast changes. This is, there's a central place that stores the value, and you can either get it at any time, or you can subscribe to when there are changes, please let me know. It's both the direct polling and the please let me know, I'm gonna be over here doing something else. So signals are an approach that is just different. That said, this is all in JavaScript as well, so there's going to be different like performance profiles and debugging. All of the code is his, so he can reason about it completely separate from like, what browser am I in? Does it implement the event system the same way, kind of a thing. So it's just a whole slew of trade-offs.
And yeah, I think both are actually good options. I don't have much to fight about. I've used what Todd said, and I only actually did this in all seriousness to demonstrate that if you're used to building in a normal framework like Vue or React, you can still have a lot of that similar functionality without having to resort to the JavaScript event system or anything like that. And so you can still stick close to like what you're used to, but without needing an entire framework. So
Really, this is a great example of just about every feature that you think is important in any given framework that you love or hate or whatever is maybe 100 lines of JavaScript at most away from being yours to command how you wish.
Yep.
Okay, so devil's advocate here, but not just devil's advocate. Actually, Ryan, I know you've got a thought brewing.
Oh, do you want me to say what my thought is? Or?
Yeah, ask your question. I know you've got one brewing.
Well, it's similar to the comment that was just made. The question is, if you can do this in 100 lines of JavaScript, and I realize I kind of know what answer I'm going to get, but why do all the frameworks exist? And what are the downsides to this approach?
Man, where was he last month? He should have been here last month.
For your presentation?
Yeah.
Yes, and
I
the
watched
discussion
it.
that was related.
I watched it online,
Oh, I'm sorry.
but it was probably not as, I didn't absorb as much because I wasn't here, but yeah, what are the downsides?
The downsides is you have to write the code or copy and paste that code, or more what I'm leaning towards is everyone here, if you want to do JavaScript, this should be simple enough that you can reason through it by looking through it. You can change the names, whatever, but it should be fairly simple to understand how to create a signal. And it's funny because I have heard all the buzz around signals, and especially with Solid using signals as a main basis. And as I looked into them and found how they were being done, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've done stuff like this so many times throughout my career, and I just didn't know that's what people call them. And so this is a very simple tool to have, that you should know about. And I suppose I think of it kind of like this. I have a brother-in-law who, he's pretty handy, but his dad was also a handyman. And at one of my siblings' wedding receptions, they had the power go out, a fuse went out. And he knew enough about being a handyman that he whips out some aluminum foil from the catering and manages to wrap it the right amount of time and replaces the fuse. And it's not a permanent fix, but he knew enough about what resistances he needed to know how many times to wrap it to get it to work for the reception to be over. And so that's what I like, knowing these things, knowing this is a tool you can use. And if you want reactivity, I don't need to install Vue or React just to get reactivity. I could do something like this.
So one other thing that Vue and React provide is the rendering part.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your rendering solution?
Let's see which one has that. Render.
Before we move on to the rendering thing, and I think I might have mentioned this last time, but to me, the more I look at, like what Todd was doing, what Jojo's doing, it seems like, well, actually, I had this problem with Webbing, right? So I've talked about Webbing before. It installs things, and it's pretty straightforward for Windows, actually. Like Windows, despite the technical challenges of Windows in and of itself, the Windows code is a lot simpler because Windows has just one way to do things. It's the weird, wacky Windows way. But when I'm trying to support BSD and Linux and Mac OS and Dragonfly, they're all just like ever so slightly different. Subtle differences in the way that you pass a flag to a command or the default folder for such and such a thing. And so the comparison I'm drawing is, like, you could do it the way that Jojo's doing it. He's showing a really valid way to do it. You could do it the way that Todd showed how to do it. You could do it the way that React shows how to do it. But it seems like the biggest difference to me is that React has a web page that you can copy and paste from. And when you go to GPT and you say, hey, how do I create a component that does this? GPT will spit out an amalgam of what was on Stack Overflow in the React web page. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I ask it how to do something in Vanilla.js, GPT is going to spit out some W3C from the 1990s before they actually cleaned it up and made it good. And so it's like the documentation is the problem. MDN's going to show you a million ways to do it wrong. Like MDN, they pride themselves on giving you the worst example first and then BOGO sort after that, right?
I think for some of the later tools in the JavaScript ecosystem, your typical LLM like ChatGPT and all that is still a little old, so it's not caught up with those times. But it tends to have a lot of modern code to.
But it's not going to be clean code like this though.
Clean is an opinion, and I don't like. It's not. I can't satisfy you, but
well. Okay, and the React code isn't necessarily going to be clean either. I mean, all of that declarative 13 levels deep of ternary operators, But
yeah, so it's really just a matter of, I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer until you are talking about the team that you're on and the project that you're on and what the needs are there. But there are a lot of trade-offs to consider that aren't just like, well, why wouldn't I use React? Because, well, now I'm using React. I have to update the version of React and whatever bespoke nonsense they come up with, or Angular, same thing. Vue, sort of same thing, not really, but they still have updates and you have to keep maintenance on that going. So it's like you're still choosing different places to put your energy, and there's not a right way to say like this is better or worse until you have all of those opinions kind of in a row and you can evaluate them in whole ways. So I'm not going to say like that React is bad. I'm mostly saying that this is a way that you can reason about in 5 minutes, and you don't need anything extra, and it will work 20 years from now.
If I was trying to introduce somebody to React versus this, it seems like the same level of complexity on the face of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like on the face of it, if I was to show somebody, okay, here's how you do this counter in React, I think the example would actually end up being longer and more complex than what is shown here.
Oh, in the frameworks, yes, because you have to conform to their workflow.
But it's what am I? Like on the face of it, the amount of information the person has to take in is I think it's about the same, really. Mm-hmm. But then, well, I guess the question becomes: do we need the whole component ecosystem? Because because Vanilla.js is not a thing. If we want to do it this way, then what ends up happening is that every component is going to implement their own create signal. So the whole reason that we have to have a framework is we have to have some set of patterns that we can agree, like you are voting with your fingers, and you're saying, I'm going to code to this API pattern, this design pattern, and if we can agree on
Which
some...
is not a framework, mind you. API framework's a little more.
But it's the set of interfaces and the implementations of those interfaces constitute a framework. Like, if we wanted to say, okay, let's take this and run with it, and we're going to create a project that's after this style, I would want to be importing that create signal everywhere that I needed a signal. I wouldn't want every single component to implement its own signal. So it's like, to get back to my example of the Webby thing and the BSD versus Mac OS versus the BSDs, pardon my French, versus Linux's, and then Alpine, which is its own thing. Anyway, it's like you end up, even though if you know all the particulars, you only need these 3 lines or these 10 lines. But to smooth around the rough edges, it's like, well, you need 10 lines here, and you need those 15 lines here, and you need these 15 lines here. The framework gives you that. And if you do this, it's much easier to understand, but then how do you...
In my experience, the lines difference is not really very interesting or useful, because you're just moving what lines you put over here versus what is in the framework black box. And those are important, because if you have a team that is composed of people that need to follow a framework,
Yeah, everybody on a
makes
team,
sense, right?
Picked up on the video.
everybody on a team needs to be able to
Yes?
work together
Yeah,
and not duplicate
Maybe.
the same 600 kilobytes of JavaScript over and over again so that the web page is 5 megabytes.
yeah. So which is on the pros or the cons side of all these different trade-offs depends on those things. And until you have the exact situation, you can't evaluate it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think to wrap things back into the presentation,
Yes.
I think the pro to doing it this way is you eliminate the black box. You eliminate the behind the scenes magic side of frameworks, and you actually know what's happening. So
But
you can have...
who's implementing the signal?
I want
Okay.
him to. I want a black box. I want a, here's your create signal function. Import it from this library, and yes, I can
I don't
copy
mind that
paste
library.
It. I
So
don't have to node modules it.
I'm all for zero dependency libraries, but when you get into the React, I'm sure maybe there's a framework here and there that have zero dependency modules everywhere. But most of them, if you need React, you need the 800 dependencies it has, because each of them have 50 dependencies, and each of them have 25 dependencies. And so you install the thing and you get into the node modules black hole.
Yeah, no.
I don't want that.
And I guess it's not really any
Nobody
better,
wants that.
because even with React, it's the same problem. You have every single component requires some other component that implements a different button or whatever. And so even if you say, okay, in React at least we agree on how create we all use the same create signal function. Once you go down the dependencies rabbit hole, I guess you end up with the same. There is no better or worse unless you have an agreement within your team. Because if you don't have agreement within your team and some sort of principles of how you're going to build things, your React code is not going to be any smaller or any easier to reason about than if people are just everybody's implementing their own create signal function.
Caveat to that, there are heuristics that you can use to identify, maybe I'm in territory that is universally bad. For instance, if you've imported left pad as an extreme example, there's probably a line up to well before you get to the point that you have left pad in your dependency tree that you're getting too many dependencies. you have swung the pendulum too far that way. Whereas like the I'm writing assembly in JavaScript is also the other side of that pendulum swing that you also want to avoid. In the middle, we can debate all day long, and that's where joy lies. But there are some like universally like not okay things to be doing.
Who is Joy and why is she telling us lies?
That's what she does. Part of the charm.
Okay.
That's where she gets her joy. So this is Baloo. This is what I mentioned some of my stuff is based on. It is literally a very small framework, or library I should say, that you can import. You can npm install it or use the unpackage. You can import it like that, and then you can just set value. And so I took some of how I implemented the listeners for that, and I took the idea of the unsubscribe from it, although I think this actually has a bug in it.
This is from the React guy.
Yes, it is. And if you look at the files, this is the function that, so it's even smaller than the one I have. But I went for slightly more verbose, and then I also opted for using a set and a get for an object so that you could just say like count dot value, and if you put a value in there, it triggers the set function. If you like just
value equals, or
yes, count dot value equals, correct.
Okay.
This one does a function. So instead of being able to say equals, you always have to call a function if you want to update the value. So that sets num to that, and then to update the number, you would run the function again, and that updates the number. And then you would call the function like that. And so my option that I did was, let's see. Nope, that's not the right file. So I did this instead of using a function. So it's still calling a function, but one just returns the value and the other sets the value. And then it lets you use it like that, where you've got count dot value equals 2, or you've got count dot value. And so this is more similar in style to, I believe, view refs. Is that right? And so I opted for that, but that's also why I did this one for React. Is this is more the React hook style, is you're able to get the count and then the set count function, and it works similar to if you were doing React. So Value is a cool library, like Ryan was saying. If you just want to install a library, you can do that. I might also wrap my little function and, publish it on npm, and then that's a library that you could npm install. It has 0 dependencies, and personally, I find that a more preferable option than including an entire framework, because now I know that I'm not going to be in, here's a good example. Let's see. So app Vivint here has Vivint, and just let's see, one of these. Yeah, there you go. So all this installed, this vanilla router has Vivint and the router that actually Todd mentioned in his Navigo. So Navigo and Vivint, and I've got all of these dependencies just for those 2 packages.
Well, and half of those, I'm looking, half of those are developer dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
They're not
All of
building
them,
deployed.
all of them except Navigo are developer dependencies.
Oh, okay.
because they're coming from Vivint.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Vivint is the only dev dependency, and Navigo is the only actual dependency for this one. And so, yeah, it's installing a bunch of extra stuff for developer dependencies, but all that is to run Vivint. Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like the black hole of Node. So I prefer my method, or Like, yeah, make it reusable. But I did actually, I found another router, but I don't think this is working. I'm not sure if you ran across it, Todd, but it's called NanoStores router. And I started working on it, but I didn't get the implementation working, so this is not technically a functional
We had a conversation
example.
about Store at some point,
Huh?
I feel like someone brought up Nano Store at some point. in
It's
a
possible.
Previous meetup.
It's possible. So I started to implement it, but I haven't tested any of this. I don't think it's actually going to work, but that uses the NanoStore router, essentially.
And so you do not have a build, is that correct?
So for this app vanilla, there's no build step. It's just a plain server. Well, no, it's just a plain server that's serving the files. It's a static file server.
Nginx. Think that.
Yeah,
Nginx.
think Nginx, not Vivint. This vanilla router includes Vivint, and the reason it includes Vivint is because Navigo sucks.
I don't know what that has to do with what you were saying 5 minutes or 5 seconds
Well,
ago.
you see, you go to import the module, and this is one thing I will tell you that has been annoying the ever-loving crap out of me, is modules like this. This is supposed to be JavaScript. If they included the extension for the imports, all of this would work. But because they're used to people using build steps, it does not work without a build step.
Yeah.
So JavaScript is non-functional without a build step. Even though if all it had was that .js, it
You
would
mean
function.
They wrote Node
Yeah.
instead of JavaScript?
Hmm?
You mean they wrote Node?
Yes,
instead of
yeah.
JavaScript?
Well, but it's deeper than that, because that's one of the reasons they do this is because there was CoffeeScript, and then there's I don't know, 6 other scripts in between, and then there's TypeScript. And so the idea was, oh well, you don't know whether you're requiring it as TypeScript or you're requiring it as JavaScript. So it's not just because it's Node, although we do have Node to blame for CoffeeScript and therefore TypeScript.
This is not a
Not
node,
as a
this is a
tool.
TypeScript thing. TypeScript is what does this.
TypeScript requires that you not use the extension, you're saying?
No, they don't require it, but that's how it's built, and nobody changes it, so they think, oh, anyone using this library is going to be having a build step.
See also the ESM debate going on for the last year and a half or whatever.
Yeah.
What's the ESM debate?
Well, they finally standardized this is how modules and imports work as an ECMAScript standard. So ESM is an ECMAScript standard module.
Okay, so we're not talking about ES build is what I was thinking. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, so ESM has existed, and now, I mean, for the longest time, browsers didn't actually implement a reasonable way to do, it was like, what was it, like relative paths or something like that. There was some critical, like, Achilles heel with the browser implementation missing.
So there are import maps now,
Okay, we have import
and
maps.
you can override some of this.
And that works in a browser.
Yes,
So there's
correct.
So ESM came out a few years ago, and browsers implemented it as
Like
they do.
10 years ago or 15 years ago.
And then Node started saying we're going to start following the standard way rather than everybody's bespoke CommonJS, AMD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
CommonJS was not bespoke. It is a standard.
well, somebody decided it was, and it wasn't the W3C. So all browsers were like, we don't care about you, and so
Yeah, fair.
you know, your mileage may vary or whatever, but the big kicker is most libraries are not like set up to work with these, or they're set up to work with everything, and Node will not compatibly use everything. And so you got to be more explicit. And now there's extensions like MJS and like it's a whole nightmare. And Node standardizing on like Node 18, we're just doing ESM, so update your stuff.
But,
and then not doing that, and then doing that, and then not doing that. And
But just for clarification, that ESM is the methodology of like
Import.
import versus require.
yes.
Yeah, so
Okay,
it's
that's the question.
ECMAScript modules that
Yeah.
come out of Ruby from Yehuda Katz, the Ruby guy, who had no respect for JavaScript and created an alternate syntax that is incompatible in every way with the JavaScript syntax, which is why it must be at the top of the file, because it has to have a special ESM parser to parse the import lines, and then the JavaScript parser resumes.
'Cause I think
Ah.
in your what is it? Your package.json, you have to like the type module or whatever.
So that's a node thing.
Yeah.
Yes, so you can either say the problem with the ESM is the asynchrony of it. So when you use import is actually an asynchronous function call, but import was standardized before deconstructors, before async, await, before promises. Import was basically the first thing to get standardized, and so it has become syntax sugar for essentially await require.async.
Okay. Yeah.
And then there ended up being problems with that, of course, because then if you wanted to asynchronously load modules, it's an asynchronous spec, but then you couldn't lazy load anything, and so then they went back and then fixed that, and then they essentially re-implemented require.
I thought require was synchronous.
Require is synchronous, but it can be asynchronous because you could just have an asynchronous function inside of it. And so, yeah, once all of the other things actually got standardized, the promises, the async await, the whatever the other thing was that I mentioned, they kind of had to backport all of that into import. And that's why it's like, if you publish something with require, it will work in pretty much everything, and the browser shim that you need for it is like 3 lines long. If you publish something with async, it breaks everything, or I mean with import, it breaks everything down the chain, because there's not a good way to handle it, and then people end up publishing multiple modules, and then you end up with that state problem, because if somebody has a was it count.js and a count.mjs, then part of your code could require part of it, and then part of your code could require the other one, and I actually had this problem in the project. So the state between two components, it had 2 separate counters, because one was ultimately getting built with the MJS, and the other one was ultimately getting built with the .js.
It was running in Node or the browser?
This was in Node.
Okay.
But I mean, the same thing would apply if you ran Vite on it, because then it would end up requiring this one.
Okay, couple questions to get us back to the presentation. First question, I know that all the other stuff is important too, but first, how many more slides do you have? Because I want you to be able to finish your presentation at a
I have some code and a router version that I want to show, and then just a couple like wrapping up
Okay,
slides.
so my first question is, the async part of your title was just referring to the fact that you can asynchronously or lazily grab components from your server only when they're required. Is that true or false? What the async part of
There's
of your
both
presentation.
async for some of them like this. So this setup lazy, instead of, if you were to import the lazy.js file and actually, let's see. One of these, where is that? I know I just saw this. This is going to drive me insane. And now I can't find the file that I'm
The one
thinking.
with bar.
Huh?
I think it's the one where you had the bar.
Was it
JS.
bar? It might
I
be.
think you had bar.
Oh, you're right. Okay, so you could do either of these. If you do this, store will be loaded as soon as this file gets imported. And so you would be importing both of those files. If you did not want to load count because it's not used until this function, you could asynchronously do it inside here, and it's not an async function, but like that, not like that, almost, there we go. Now it's an async function. And now you could do stuff where, let's see.
It's an async component even, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's an async component, it's an async function. And so now in the other files, you could do await setup bar, and that would function in a synchronous fashion. But if you remove that, you could do setup bar dot then, and now it's loading even asynchronously, and everything after it will keep executing. And once it's available, it gets added in, but it doesn't block the loading of everything else. And so I'm doing this in several locations where it makes more sense to not block the loading of other things. So rather than await import makes sense here because count is going to be needed all over the place in this function. So awaiting it makes sense for that single function. But there are scenarios where you might not want to load count there yet if you're not really using it. And it, like, if, for example, you have something that only happens when a form is submitted, you might want to asynchronously load all of that once you click the submit button, but you don't need to load all of that functionality until that submit is clicked.
So it's more or less a performance thing.
It's an execution lane thing. Like, how do you want the thing to do its stuff, whether or not it's performance or not? Like, order of operations might matter, order of hitting the server might matter or not, but this gives you the option of,
Gives
like,
you the
we're not stuck in one
Yeah.
workflow.
Yeah.
So
These, go ahead.
this setup right here, which I haven't gotten to showing yet, but that's what I'm getting to, is the router setup I have implements this function. And it calls, as I'm sure you're familiar with the dash retail endpoint there, that just gets the rates for dash. And this little component has two functions in here, setup fiat and setup dash. And both of these get attached to different input fields, and one converts dash into fiat and the other converts fiat into dash, and they're almost exactly the same function, just with a little bit different of equations here for, you know, the conversion. And they update each other's fields essentially. So I use the global store to update these, and until in the router, until you load this page, none of this stuff gets loaded until you go to that root. And then that root can trigger all of this. And one of the things I came across recently in the Maya stuff I've been working on, there is a cryptocurrency, is it a DEX? Is that what it's called? Decentralized exchange called Maya, and it's built on Thor. And both of these allow you to swap between cryptocurrencies. So you could swap between Bitcoin and Dash, or vice versa. And I have been working on an interface for it, but to do a bunch of the Dash or the Maya conversions, you have to call 3 or 4 endpoints. But one of those is needed for almost any other calls you make. And so I load it as soon as the page is loaded, but I don't want anything else getting blocked because that's loading. And in a very small race condition, I found out that the whole thing would stop working if it got to, essentially I was defining like a value like that. So I had rates equal the rates value, whatever. So I had a variable like that, and then throughout other files, I was trying to access rates, this uppercase one, and it was working almost everywhere, just every now and then, nothing would load. And I was going, wait, rates exist, like rates is defined up at the top, like just under the imports. There's, like a let rates, uppercase, rates equal. So there should have been at least an empty array. And so what I discovered, and I can't believe I didn't think of this before, is you can have stuff like this, where get rates is an asynchronous function. It's defined right here. You can use the then, but I think what I ended up doing was, for example, like say in the render function, I absolutely needed rates, but this render only happens in the scenarios where you're like loading these other things. You can actually await data. And so even though you've got a then already attached, you can also await the data because you didn't apply an await there. And so you can have it load the rates. And so there were scenarios where I could go, if rates.length is equal to 0. Whoops. Where's my delete key? So then only if rates for some reason was empty, which obviously it's complaining about await because that is not an await or an asynchronous function. In the scenario where rates is a empty or length 0 array, it goes, oh, clearly data hasn't finished executing, so we're going to now await what's defined up here, and then as soon as it's done, this stuff gets set. So I was still able to have my cake and eat it too. I was able to have it function where nothing else gets blocked from the rendering and like bundling, well, not bundling, the execution of the components. None of that got blocked, but in the scenario that you needed it, you could block that one little function where it's absolutely going to be needed just with a little if like that.
So, for clarity's sake, in this case, it seems like it would be better to call that something like loaded, and then just await loaded where needed. Because the idea of putting an if statement around that is kind of, like, why even bother putting the if? Why not just do await loaded? Never mind, that's an architectural decision. So,
it is, in the scenario that I was using it, there are multiple, and I'm not saying I've written the code well in this scenario, but there are multiple things happening, and that function gets called on any cryptocurrency pair, I think. And so there are several pairs where you want it to start getting the data, you want it to load the address information. Essentially, it was filling out a table. So I want it to go through, I want it to actually render the address of the Dash, the Bitcoin, the whatever. So I want it to render those, but I also want it to trigger, hey, get my values for this address. And it was in this loop where maybe it could be separated differently. I don't know, but
it was like right there. Like,
well, I wouldn't use it in this function. I am saying in the scenario where I was using it, that was actually very helpful because now suddenly I could do all of it asynchronously where nothing got blocked, and then exactly where I do need it, I need it to wait. Do not do anything without this. I was able to use that same value that I was already setting, and so it enhanced what I was already thinking of as asynchronous, essentially.
No, I mean, like, I totally get what you're saying with like the let data equals get rates, data then do some stuff.
Yeah.
But if you put the await in I don't remember where it was, the render function or whatever.
I just did that as an example. Yeah.
Right, but it's like it's a no op if it's already loaded, and if it's not loaded, like the if is redundant. That's all I was saying, because the await does the if for you.
Yes-ish.
Okay, moving on.
Essentially, I didn't want to await anything
Brian, am I gonna have to
unless.
kick you out?
I like him.
It's because the promise has already been resolved, so it'll just be like,
Yes. If the rates already had the data, then it means the promise was resolved, and I don't want to block anything from rendering slowly. Or I don't want it to think it needs to request something. And that's why.
Maybe you don't wanna, if you have an await, you're setting a loading state beforehand. And then you'd always be setting that loading state even if it's been loaded, so you might see a spinner for split second.
Something
every time
like
it's
that.
doing that check, maybe?
No,
Maybe, I don't know.
because the if,
It's like,
like
it's not
the
loading.
await.
Let's come back to this
Hey.
after I
Yeah,
finish.
okay.
I'm getting near the end here.
Yeah.
Let's push this over the,
All right, let's push it over the.
all right. So this is the router version. It's using the Navigo. It's got the same values here, so it's using the same functionality I already showed, where it links that up, it can unload it. And then I've got an about page that's a very simple, like, that's all it is. It didn't do much there. But the convert one is what I've been showing the code for, is that called the API. So one dash is worth 32.35, whatever.
Woo!
To the moon.
And you could easily say, okay, I only have $15. How much is that in dash? Or I want 50 dash.
Okay.
And
Me too.
this is using vanilla components. It's updating both fields. Each one uses the global state. And so that's how it's doing it, is with these functions. So setup fiat convert gets triggered for this field on this side because it's the fiat value. And then setup dash convert is triggered for this side.
Wait, go back, that was too quick. Okay, thanks.
Now, what both of these are doing, which don't need to be done, is both of them are requesting the rates. And this is something I didn't get to implementing, but this is where you could cut this out, like I was trying to describe, is if you wanted it to load the rates as soon as this component is loaded, you could take it out there and here. And so then, oops. So then, in this scenario, get rates is being triggered as soon as the fiat.js component is being loaded, and it would be trying to set the dash fiat rate. And so this should still work because of how it's set up, I think.
And is that returning a signal, that get rates?
Yep.
And that's-
So dash fiat rate, we can go back to the store here, and it's just using these signals.
Will you show
So
the
this
render?
signal is an object, but the other signals are just numbers. Show what?
Show the render again.
So render is just setting the value of the input field. That's it.
Okay, so it's literally just, it's taking whatever the element was, which was passed in as part of the setup, yes.
So V is the current value, P is the previous value.
Render is do side effect, which in this case is DOM operation.
Yes,
Or-
Well,
essentially.
it's-
But you could also have, element dot inner HTML or whatever. So you could be modifying the
Insert
HTML.
adjacent HTML.
Yes, that's how I do it in most scenarios. I'm just keeping it
This is
simple
a
right now.
bad example.
Yes. In any case, this is my example of, this is both fetching the data, it does it asynchronously, you can load the components, it will load the values from a remote API, you have immediate access to it and no framework, so.
Do you have anything that renders recursively in this? I mean, this seems like such a small demo that probably
That's
doesn't.
what I
No.
was wondering too. Like,
But-
what's the overall architecture story for using these components?
I didn't get that. Sadly, that's what part of what I haven't gotten to. I've done similar things for the Dash stuff, which all of that code is public under the Dash incubator or Dash Hive. Dash Hive, and Yeah, I did want to get to more of showing some examples, and actually one of the things I wanted to get to, but I didn't, is showing how to use the template tag in HTML to set up your HTML separately from the JavaScript so that you're not even using template strings. And so I was hoping to get to that.
Because I want to see that.
I mean, maybe. Let's see. I could try.
Like you can do that without a build step.
Yes.
That would be nice. I'd like to see that, and also like what the styling story. Like, can you make styling that's
Scope.
Most of
to
the Zest
component?
components, their tests are built off of template HTML elements. So they're in the HTML file, they're just there, you just get them like document query by ID, get the ID done.
Yeah.
It's just in
I-
HTML
yeah.
rather than in JavaScript.
It seems pretty simple conceptually. I just want that to be part of the library. I want this kind of thing in a micro library.
And
That's what I would like.
Is this template that you're writing here, is that the HTML5 template that is actually recognized by browsers as a template?
Yes.
Hmm?
And that works now?
I think so. We're
That's
about to
for
find
at
out.
least 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, like, across the browsers, like it'll work on mobile Safari
Yeah.
Yeah,
and Android.
Mm-hmm.
as far as I'm
cool.
aware. So this template tag has been in there like since 2015. It's been in there long enough. It's in all of them.
It's just been there long enough that I remember every time I've wanted to use it, it hasn't been supported yet.
Yeah, probably.
Well, Safari is the new IE, so.
And Android. And we have a lot of the new IEs actually. So, and the thing that the template does is something like, doesn't render it in the DOM, but like prepares the model for it, or give me a refresher on what template does.
It doesn't in a document fragment, or is it Shadow DOM?
Hover over
Do
the
you
template
remember?
tag.
It's a fragment. Shadow DOM is part of the custom elements.
Is used declare fragments. Yeah, so it does it in a document fragment that can be cloned.
So nice.
Yeah.
I can't believe it finally works.
It's not rendered, but it is in the tree.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's just, for the longest time, this was not can I use.
Yeah. There is a more confusing aspect of these that are slots. They're kind of weird, specific use case, but they're a way of doing some dynamic stuff that you could just like pass into the component, and
I vaguely remember this.
it's weird. It's weird.
I've looked at it, but I can't remember
That's why I
it.
used it in Vue, yeah.
Slot.
So what I'm waiting for is like, okay, you've built a dozen of these little micro apps and you keep copying and pasting your utility folder everywhere. So you decided to bundle this all up into a little package. And so we get to the XKCD scenario of we've got all these other standards
And then
we've got
I built a
Jojo,
framework.
for instance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it could be
Well,
a
I've been
collection of
lied to.
libraries. I don't think that you could call this, I don't see what this is evolving into a framework. I see it evolving into a pattern with libraries.
Yes, most
The
likely.
distinction being
that's-
framework, you insert your code inside, library.
That's React's
you use.
argument. They're a library, not a framework.
React is a
Right.
library.
But they're clearly not.
It's
a
also
library.
useless on its own, so you get the whole framework ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's a gray line.
By the way,
React is a library, like they lie about being a brary.
React is just the rendering
Where
layer.
was Joy at again?
React is single
Just
dependency.
saying, we're all in this party together. Yeah, the React is definitely just a display library, and it's very useful for that very limited use case. And then nobody does that. Nobody stops there. Because that's not actually that helpful to the problems that we want to solve.
If you need a compiler for it, if you have to write your code in such a way that requires a compiler, there is not the capability of calling it a library.
You don't.
Agreed.
You don't need a library at all. I used to write raw React when it was first released
You can
without
still script.
any
Oh, come on.
Yeah, nah, I'm not buying
Is
it.
JavaScript a library?
But you're getting into like
No.
these template tags and stuff that
But
Vue
you need
does it.
to
Like,
turn it into, you
I
need
just
to
have the
compile
turnkey
it.
black box.
No.
I'm just
It's like a
being
gray box.
smart
You're
aleck.
gonna have a box.
Okay,
And also Zarek has had a few comments. He's talking about how, well, that one's not relevant anymore. It's been too long. Web components for the win, and currently shows template at 97% plus support. Having been familiar with Can I Use, I'm going to say that's because Baidu, Opera Mini, and Queen Quang are not supported.
Who's Opera? Oh yeah, I remember.
Opera Mini is the Wii, the original Wii, not the Wii U.
Firefox. Oh, if you're building a project,
Shadow
don't.
Root.
What?
It's just Shadow Root.
So 2013, 2015, 2013.
So I would say 97% support
2013.
is absolutely abysmal, except that 3% is literally in China. Or on the Wii, which I don't think websites are being visited by the Wii.
Okay, I changed my mind. I'm not gonna live code this template thing because I've already been coding like all
Can
day
you
just to
show-
get this.
Fine!
Can you show can you show more about how you're rendering thing? Because in the one it was just updating the value of an input, but
Yes.
if you
You
want
wanna
to
see rendering a component?
What is the
He's
I
not
want to
doing-
see
He's
what
not
I'm
doing
doing.
custom elements. Like, he's just taking in the tag that represents the root of what he's trying to do and then manipulating it like you would in vanilla JavaScript anywhere. So, it's not there's not component magic here.
He's
Well, I
passing
wanna-
in
The magic is
HTML as a
the
value.
template is passed into the function, right?
Yeah, it's
So
Always.
I'm not.
Jojo
I'm not showing it as much in this, but I do it quite differently for a lot of the dash work I've done. But I do a lot more of strings like this, where you're doing that's bad. Let's do app is equal to document dot create. So you can do stuff like this where you're creating a div or whatever, and then instead of inserting to actual document, you're basically inserting into a fragment. So you might set the inner HTML of that, but then when you go to add the fragment into the DOM, you would do like app dot, this is where AJ's thing of insert,
JSON HTML.
but you just
Whatever
threw me
it's
off.
called.
insert.
Adjacent, there we go.
Sorry.
Adjacent, I don't know why it's not giving me
In inner HTML is the
don't
second
have an app
fastest.
anymore. You
Capital
have an app
A.
with a capital A.
what's
Yeah.
capital A?
App is capitalized.
Capitalize your.
No,
No, at the beginning of line 43.
no,
Yeah?
this is the fragment. This is the
Okay,
document.
so what's lowercase app now?
Lowercase app is going out to, it's being provided by main here. So lowercase app is actually the app right here. So document, query selector, app. So where you want to insert to. So I should have done a different name, but I didn't make that mistake.
So-
I get why you guys were thinking I was making a mistake, but I should have chose
Funny
different
thing,
names.
if you delete line 11, there will be no error in your application.
Yes, because it's an app ID and that gets added to document and yeah,
It gets added to the global scope,
Yeah.
so line 11 is a no-op.
yeah.
Don't ever program that way, please.
I like no ops.
No, the no-op is good because it's documentation.
Dang it, where was I doing this?
But that's literally why I don't use IDs, is because that creates the most subtle and difficult to debug bugs when you have things that are just being put into the global namespace without.
Yeah, I'm using IDs for the most part. Where the freak was I doing that code? Why am I?
Were you in bar?
Was that it?
Just hit the back button.
Was it Home.js?
Oh, wait.
Oh, that's right, thank you. Yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh, where is this code? Yes. Okay, so app is the document fragment, so I could call this frag. How about that? So that is frag, and frag inner HTML is that, and then we want to insert adjacent element to the app with frag. So a lot of stuff.
Can you go up to lazy L? There is no item called lazy in the DOM to query.
Yes, now there isn't. You're correct. So until this gets added, so I would actually need to add that up here. So adding it to the bottom was the wrong choice because until it's added, this query selector would return nothing.
Okay.
But that's where it gets added, is there's a lazy.
So if you wanted to have like your a component within the what, like within the template there, would you just do like the $ brackets and then call the components render function within there?
Yeah, so you could do something like this right here. So you could do like other component or whatever, and that could be an array, or you could have already resolved that. So other component could be like, let's see. Come on.
Danger, danger, Will Robinson.
So that is how you could do multiple components. Or, you know, you could have whatever, like however many components, however you're going to set up your main app, you could bring in the HTML like that. And
if the other component had its own state, how would you continually rerun that render? Like calling it the other component's render function, or
Like locally scoped state or local.
yeah, like if
So-
in other component you create a count signal.
yeah, so this might be, for example, you could have, so the render side of things would be more or less your pure HTML type of stuff. And I mean, you could just return render if you wanted, or you could return an array with several different options if you might need to modify things. A lot of the code I've done for Dash, I mean, I've figured out stuff now just for this presentation that I hadn't taken the time to figure out yet for Dash. And so some of what I figured out now might get implemented in the Dash work just because I think it's actually more ergonomic and more developer friendly. So I might implement some of this in the Dash work, but you could essentially have stuff like this where constant, let's see.
From the one perspective, I mean, you could still load all of your state into your components. I would worry about leaky event handlers, which I don't remember if that is a problem or not with the way that you implemented the use signal or the create signal. But I imagine if you did .on and you didn't have some routine to clean up, yeah, because then you need lifecycle management. Then you need some sort of cleanup for the frag before you re-render it.
And then you get view.
Well, the biggest value of writing your own thing is job security, because you're the only one that knows how it works, so they keep you.
Well,
Only if you screwed it up.
I mean,
Otherwise,
if-
everybody should know how it works.
if it was as simple as what we've seen, if it was as simple as the presented material, because now we're into ad hoc territory, right?
Yeah.
If it was as simple as the presented material, I would say if you can't hand that off to another developer and have them understand it, you didn't hire the right person. Because that was really clean. And here we're going into contrived examples and stuff, so I imagine that this,
Well, I don't think that the presentation gave us a good story about like component composition.
yeah, that's not where we're at this point, right?
No.
If it was like a whole.
But that's the whole
full-fledged
basis of web
application,
development.
It'd be a different story of like pain points and like opening up flaws to like building it this way.
I don't think there's a lot of flaws to building it this way, other than it requires skill.
Yeah, I
So-
think it's more of like the trade-offs of.
Yeah.
I feel like you would have a different conversation of the trade-offs of building it this way. Of like, was it worth doing it this way, or does it make more sense to like have the black box for whatever you're trying to do? It's like the case-by-case thing.
This is where I think when there are a lot of boot camps that are like they're making React developers, you're not learning JavaScript, you're learning React. And so you come out of it knowing React, but not necessarily the inner workings or like the trade-offs that you are making essentially. And so that is great, but it does make, at least in my opinion, for companies that are, if you start hiring bootcamp developers, you can't stop hiring bootcamp developers because they only know React. And so you're going to be stuck using React because all of the new people know React. And as people leave, you only have the new people who know React and they never learn JavaScript. And so I think the case that I'm more trying to make is learn JavaScript. Whether you know React already, whether you know Vue, Svelte, Quick, whatever, Solid, if you know JavaScript, you can implement these functions and get the functionality that any of these frameworks provide you, but without needing the freaking black hole of the frameworks. And it's probably not going to be right in every scenario. And if you work for a company, using React might be outside of your choice you get to make as a developer. You might have to use React. But you will be able to find solutions when React goes wrong and when something React the right way is actually causing a problem. Knowing these things, you can go, oh, there's clearly some sort of bug in the state library, in Redux or whatever. Like there's a bug here. And because I know how to make a signal and we need this feature next week, I can make a signal as a temporary patch and get this working exactly how it's supposed to. And yeah, we might need to update this and go back and switch it back to the Redux thing once it's patched. But right now, I don't have time to go through Redux, find where the bug is, get a pull request, get it approved, get it merged, get it past 150 comments about people complaining that, you don't always have time for that. And if you're trying to get a sprint done or whatever, knowing how to do these things can improve your life, even if you're not able to switch your entire app to vanilla JavaScript.
You just need like a roll of aluminum foil and you're good.
Exactly. Knowing how to do that patch, sometimes you just need to make it through the wedding reception. You don't need a new fuse.
Yeah.
It's also not like an either or. Like
Yeah.
none of the things here can't exist in a React code base.
Yes.
Just easily.
Yes.
Depends. Because again, the whole framework thing, because React is making the assumptions that it's tracking all of your state. And I think since hooks have been adapted, that's less the case. But Angular and React, when they were contemporaries, you literally could not use vanilla JavaScript in either one of them because of the way that their observer systems were set up. If
Yes.
you used something outside of them that wasn't in their lifecycle management, that was, say you did a request that had a callback, there would be no way to set the data to get the page to update.
How much interrupt you
There
need,
was.
at what points, at what intervals is going to be situational. So it might be harder in some cases than others, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible. People clearly do that with React especially.
Is it the newer Angular version that has like signals built into it?
Yeah.
I think I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. We're very upset about it.
All right, in any case, that's more or less my presentation. So these are some ways you can find me, and if you're not in the Discord, which I'm thinking all of you guys are, I recognize all you, I've seen you in there, but that's a QR code that can get you into the Stack.js Discord, and that's a QR code to the slides, which points you here, and so you can get access to the slides, and then also back here are the links to the different, oh wait, those are bad links. I need to update that. They have dashes now in them, and I forgot to update that. Other than that, I'll get that updated a little later tonight, but yeah, that's my presentation.
What? Can you go back one more? I thought you had some other links there. Okay, I'm just gonna.
What do you use to make the slides?
Slide dev.
Slide dev?
Yes, it's a Vue project. As I'm touting doing vanilla. I was really tempted. I was really tempted to try and do a vanilla version, but I'm like, I don't have time for that.
Look, Jojo, I don't believe in
That
any
is
of your
99%
crap.
of the
When you can do your when you can do your presentation and your components, then I'll believe in you. Okay. No. I want to say thank you very much. It was very obvious that you put a lot of effort into the aesthetic and the technical on this presentation, and it was quite phenomenal. So
Thank you.
thank you very much. Really
You're welcome.
appreciate that. I think you deserve at least 2 more rounds of applause. And then another. Done!
No, now we're in scout territory.
And now we're in what territory?
Now we're in
Scout.
scout territory. It's not a thing.
I don't even know what that means.
When do we start singing Do Your Ears Hang Low?
Now! Okay, so with that, well, Jojo, for being an esteemed speaker again, as you know, custom here at Utah Stack.js,
Awards coming.
we have a stack of things for you to choose from. You can get some nice male and or female earrings, as well as these things. You can have one of those, or you can have one of these, or you got one of these. What do you want?
Let's see.
You've got 5 seconds.
5 seconds.
3,
I'll take one of these.
2. Okay, thank you.
5 seconds, no description whatsoever. Just things and some things, also some things. Pick.
Yep. That's it.
Here you go.
Otherwise, it would all go to DI.
What? No, you take. That's the boxes for you.
I take the entire box?
Yeah, I got 300 of them. I have
Oh.
27 more boxes. I think.
What happened to the keychain version?
Oh, did you want the keychain version? I don't think I have that with me today. Here's the keychain.
No, I'm good.
No, I can get you the keychain version. Actually, I might have that in. We'll talk. We'll talk.
Sweet.
I can get you the keychain version if you want. Okay. And then other orders of business. I think I'll go ahead and end the stream at this point. And we'll go over our end of year
Profit sharing.